A US Apache helicopter goes down in the Strait of Hormuz. The US, angered, hits targets in Iran, which then retaliates with missiles and drone strikes on US allies. The big questions among the many is the escalating violence outrunning diplomacy. And what do you call a ceasefire when there is plenty of fire? We'll get to those questions with our expert shortly. But first, let's quickly look at what happened. Iran's Revolutionary Guard says they struck targets including Mowaffaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, where the US stations F-35 fighter jets, as well as military targets in Bahrain and Kuwait. That's after the Guard said Qeshm Island and the port city of Sidik came under attack by the US. Iranian media also reported explosions in the port city of Bandar Abbas and later near Jask. And this then is what we know about the downing of the US Apache helicopter. Washington says the aircraft was near the Strait of Hormuz when it came down. The US is using helicopters to patrol the strait and enforce its blockade on shipping. The aircraft then hit a drone just before crashing into the sea. US President Donald Trump blamed Iran for the downing. Now, according to the US military, the two-person crew spent 2 hours in the water before being picked up by a drone boat. This is the first known time that a drone has rescued military personnel in this conflict. The US then launched its strikes on Iran, calling them a proportionate response. So to talk about all of that, Sascha Bruckmann joins me, Research Fellow for Defence and Military Analysis at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Great to have you on the line in Bahrain's capital, Manama. For context, were you close enough to be affected in Bahrain by the Iranian strikes?
Well, affected is a broad term in this war that we're facing. I woke up at 4:31 this morning when I heard a few intercepts, and I think I saw the last one. So yes, Bahrain was targeted. I think from what I've seen, everything was intercepted today, but we saw the backlash, we saw the angry response of Iran against Bahrain this morning.
All right, let's get there. I want to start with the Apache helicopter, if we could. How unusual is it for a helicopter of this type, Sascha, and of this pedigree to be lost in this way?
Pedigree is a good word because this is a formidable war machine. I think the Apache was originally intended to serve in Europe in the Fulda Gap during the Cold War, right? It was designed to fire 16 Hellfire missiles that's originally to destroy Soviet tanks. It's been heavily modified over the last decade. So it served in Afghanistan and Iraq. I personally had some as Overwatch over me in some of the most difficult hours during my service in Afghanistan. So it's a very modernized war machine. It has been crucial to enforce the sanctions. So if you think about this round of escalatory violence, about a week ago, the US said it had disabled one tanker, an Iranian tanker that was trying to run the blockade, and that a Hellfire missile had struck the tanker's engine room. So that is exactly the missile that this helicopter is predestined to carry. There are other platforms that can do this, and I don't recall any official confirmation that it was an Apache. But these helicopters and that missile is like the typical set. And they have been flying over the Strait of Hormuz, enforcing the American blockade against Iran. So it's not unusual in that sense, as the Apache have been the helicopters of choice to support that effort.
Sascha, what does it tell us about the operational environment and how dangerous things still are in and around the Strait of Hormuz?
So I would maybe first on the strategic level characterize it this way. I think the US President Trump is currently seeking a negotiated outcome. And he's been, one of the points of evidence is that he's been trying to re-establish the ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. Whereas Iran, I think, is more opportunistically in trying to test the limits. It senses that Trump wants to make a deal. It doesn't want to get bombed. Iran doesn't want to go back to full-scale war. But there's a margin in between where it's quite opportunistically, and it's trying to assert its dominance over the Strait of Hormuz as it has proclaimed. So there are a lot of assets in the area, and we saw the reports today said it's an Iranian drone. I've seen anything from it was a Shahed, which I don't believe because a Shahed doesn't have the ability to dynamically target. I've seen FPV drones were in the mix of possible answers. It's too early to tell. But whether it was a loitering munition, the Iranians have something called the 358, which would be an adequate one, or something fired from one of their smaller vessels, or one of those FPV drones. There's definitely a lot of Iranian activity and American activity. The space is very confined. So they're very close, operating very close to each other. It's very dangerous because you don't know which day Tehran decides today is a good day to test the limits of the US.
Yeah, the US and Israel started attacking Iran on February 28th. They've unloaded billions of dollars in weapons since. Why is it still dangerous for them to fly over the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, a helicopter like this or other assets like Reaper drones, you saw US Congress, there was a testimony by one of the leading US generals, I think said lost 24 Reapers during this conflict, because you have manpads. So where the Americans and the Israelis were targeting what we call the integrated air and missile defense. So where everything is strung together, larger missile defenses, larger aerospace defenses with radars and communication centers and computation behind it. There's always the possibility that some individual soldier with a shoulder-fired missile, a manned portable air defense system, manpads, is able to take down a helicopter or low-flying drone. So there's always a residual danger in this, even though you can say, well, the large integrated air defense systems has been completely wiped out, has been destroyed. And I believe that's largely true, even though we now have to assess there's a clock ticking, and the Iranians are every day that they're not being bombed, right? They're trying to reestablish all of their military capabilities. But first and foremost, there's always the possibility that someone with a short-range air defense system or the manpads, without being connected, just opportunistically loitering, luring, looking around, can get a lucky shot.
So the US said its military, Sasha, their response, Bahrain, Kuwait and Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, was proportionate. Given what we know about the targets the US hit, Bandar Abbas, for example, which was hit very early, are there targets at this point which are still being hit that are of any great importance, or is this retaliation the military equivalent of blowing off steam at this point?
There's an element of that. I think if you look at the targets that CENTCOM has said, proportionality, that is language when you want to gain time. That is language when you don't want to escalate again. I think the US is in a de-escalatory mood for the time being. CENTCOM reflects that the targets, Bandar Abbas is the primary military port. There will be air defense systems around that. There might even be the odd radar that has survived the war. Qeshm Island is what the closest thing to an unsinkable aircraft carrier, the language often used against Israel. But Iran has a version of that. Qeshm is a drone base. Qeshm was an air defense base. Qeshm is where some of these smaller missile boats that the IRGC still has. So yes, I think CENTCOM has targeted predominantly military targets, but also it is related to what is currently going on, as in the forces that are still trying to project Iranian power into the Strait of Hormuz, but it's not at the strategically significant level, right? So the damages, they're measurable, but they don't change the equation. This is not something that's going to be on the negotiation table between Washington and Tehran will now go and it's like, oh no, you struck us again, right? This is not on that level.
And just quickly, same goes for the other side. Iran has responded by targeting sites linked to US forces in Bahrain, Kuwait and Jordan. What is Tehran achieving by continuing to pepper bases in this way at this stage?
Not too much directly versus the Americans, because I don't think that the damages have in any way or shape decreased the American ability to wage war. But they're making the allies in the Gulf nervous, especially. You saw anytime something goes through, and it was a Shahed 136, like it was a 20 to 50 kilowatt, but it hit the airport. It disabled Terminal 1. It's an outsized damage to the actual danger of the system. So it will make the GCC countries nervous. It will make global oil markets nervous. It has an outsized, disproportionate effect politically rather than military.
Right, so great context. And with that as the backdrop, I want to draw our attention to a demand the Iranian Foreign Minister repeated in a post on X. Let's bring up what Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said. Leave our region, if you want to be safe? The question coming from that, does Iran actually have the capability to make the US military rethink its regional presence? I know you touched on this. Or is that beyond Tehran's reach? How realistic is this, Sasha? And just as we take a look perhaps at a map showing all of the US bases in the region, why do you think Iran keeps making this demand when it's clearly such a big ask of the Americans at this point?
Well, there's two things. A, this has been the Iranian goals, or the Islamic Republic of Iran's goal since 1979, right? I think if you look over the decades, the idea was if the Americans and the Israelis are gone, the Iranians have that feeling that they can dominate the regions, right? The Arabs are pushovers. It's only the Americans and the Israelis that are the actual military stumbling blocks for the Iranians. Destroy Israel, get the Americans to leave, and you can dominate Iran. That is, I think, the broad contour of the geopolitical strategy of Iran. So this is nothing new. This is consistent for almost 50 years. This is what the Islamic Republic wants. Now, in the current context, I think it plays into the context of global confrontation between the US and China, whereas the idea, and I've been on the show before and I said my interpretation is the US wanted this one last hurrah, defeat the Islamic Republic, and withdraw forces from the Middle East to concentrate everything against China. And you see that with the missile defenses, right? The shortage of Patriot interceptors and THAAD interceptors is a fight between two four-star generals, the one in charge of CENTCOM here in this region, and the one in charge of Indo-Pacific, Indo-PACOM, Admiral Paparo, where there are not enough interceptors between Ukraine, the Middle East, and Indo-PACOM, China, to fulfill all demands. So there's always been this, the Iranians are opportunistically saying, basically, come on, leave. We know you want to go to China. You wanted to win this war, you haven't. We're in charge now, just accept it, leave, and everything will be okay. And you can kind of focus on China. And that appeals, I think, to some sections of the political spectrum in Washington. And it's just the Iranians have a good finesse. They have a very good feeling for what is politically opportune in capitals around the world.
Yeah, and part of that, what chance the Gulf nations on the other side of the argument, if you like, are seriously reviewing the effectiveness of American protection? I wonder if they might be reviewing the risk-benefit, Sasha, of having American bases in places like Bahrain, Jordan and Kuwait.
Yeah. There's no alternative, though. So when I say this, and this is the Iranian plan, I don't think this is actually going to happen. If you look at what's happened during the war, the tactical and operational integration between the US and the GCC has gone deeper in many cases. If you look at what they're buying now, it's still mostly US. The shortage of missile interceptors is due to the fact that the Patriot is the best system in the world and no one else makes something comparable. It's just that the Americans can't produce enough between its 18 customers. Doesn't mean that you abandon it because of that. It's just you're trying to get ahead of others in the queue, or you put a bit more money on the table, or you buy other systems. Kuwait, billions on the table right now. Qatar, UAE, everyone, they're trying to get other interceptors on top, not to replace the Americans. So I don't think that either the American idea of will make quick work of the Iranians and will leave the region as victors in a peaceful state, nor the Iranian version of will kick the Americans out of the region, will dominate is anywhere. Neither of those visions is about to happen. We're in a stalemate situation.
That was going to be my next question. Do you genuinely fear a major escalation in this conflict from this strange position we are in now, in the middle of a ceasefire that's not really a ceasefire? I want to know, I guess, what do you call this current situation? Is it a ceasefire in the way you understand the term?
I feel your pain, but for brevity's sake, I call it a ceasefire, just because we're not to the major operations of dozens of missiles and hundreds of UAVs per day and hundreds of US airstrikes. So we're in this controlled kind of linear escalation. There's a tit for tat. Every action has a reaction, but not every action has two reactions, and we're kind of in an exponential increase. So yes, I call it a ceasefire. We're in a stalemate, that is currently being negotiated between the Americans and the Iranians. You can see that, as I said, I think the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire that the Americans have brokered is testimony that the Iranians want Hezbollah to be part of the overall deal with the Americans, and the Americans concur for the time being. So we're in this. there's going to be potshots. There's going to be some violence in the next couple of weeks, months. I don't know how long it's going to last. There are elections in Israel. There will be the midterms in the US. That could be two benchmarks. Tehran tells us that they're confident. They don't feel a pain. There is pain in Tehran, right? They're not able to export their oil either. But no one knows the clock that is ticking in Tehran. They're very good at hiding their own pain and portraying to the world that everything is fine and we're completely in charge. But that is absolutely also not the case. They have suffered tens of billions of losses. So everyone is trying to hide their hurt. Everyone is trying to do confidence and playing for time, hoping that the other side is running out of time and political will.
Yeah, and so just to pick up your point to finalise this, about the holding pattern, if you like, if it's not a ceasefire, if it's something like a holding pattern as we wait for a breakthrough in negotiations, it might sound like a strange question as we have just detailed a series of highly explosive strikes, and you heard some of them, and counterstrikes. But in military terms, is this a relatively controlled series of punches and counter-punches at this point?
Control is not the term that I would use, because everybody's trying to hurt each other, right? When the Shahed goes through Terminal 1 of Kuwait Airport is out of commission for a week. So it's controlled in the sense of every reaction has a reaction, but you're trying to each side is trying to hit the other one and hurt the other one. And outsized hurt is actually the idea, because that's the one thing that could change the equation, especially from Tehran's point of view.
Do you fear a major escalation at this point?
Not for the time being. I think both sides, with how they have tried this tit for tat, how they engineer their reactions and how they communicate, right? As I said, CENTCOM and President Trump's de-escalatory language, as well as Tehran's kind of still relatively controlled reactions, even though it spreads it out over time or over location, it's still a one-for-one. So until something changes strategically, either that we're getting closer to a negotiated outcome and someone wants like a last-minute ditch, a violent kind of attempt to change the balance on the negotiation table, or the failure of negotiations, or something breaks in the relationship. Those are the three kind of scenarios in which we could escalate. But for the time being, and we should be very cautious with the time frame. For the time being could mean days or weeks, maybe months. I think we're in a stable cessation of hostilities, if we're not calling it ceasefire.
Yeah, let's not call it a ceasefire, a holding pattern, whatever we want to classify it as, Sasha. Really appreciate your time. Sasha Brookman, Research Fellow for Defence and Military Analysis at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. It's been great to have you online from Bahrain. Many thanks for taking our questions today.
Thanks for having me.
Big thanks once again to Sasha Brookman for answering our questions. A reminder and a call for you now to get involved in the chat attached here. I asked a lot of questions of our guest, and I'm looking forward to wading into the comments later to see what some of your answers are, or questions of your own. The central questions we're asking you: can diplomacy still prevent an escalation here? And who do you think has the stronger strategic position right now? Over to you as we say over and out from Berlin for now. Goodbye.